I'm in love with the shape of you. You push and pull like a magnet too. 'Cause I'm in love with the shape of you. Last night you were in my room. Now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day I'm discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you. So, if you haven't figured it out yet, we are going to be talking about the X-Files Season 1 episode, Shapes. This is gonna be a long and involved vlog. I just want to warn you right now. Gonna talk about some problematic shit, so buckle up. I took a poll on Twitter. It was between Shapes, Revelations, or Badla. And the people on Twitter voted about Shapes. It's an episode I've wanted to talk about for quite a while now, ever since I wanted to start doing X-Files vlogs. So buckle up. Shapes is my second favorite episode in season 1 after Beyond the Sea, because how the hell are you going to beat the best episode of season 1, Beyond the Sea? When I tell people that Shapes is my second favorite episode, their first reaction is, what the fuck are you talking about? Shapes is a terrible episode of the X-Files. And I can definitely see their point. So I want to put out a kind of sort of disclaimer at the beginning of this vlog. I want to begin by saying that the X-Files episode Shapes is problematic as all fuck. If you've watched Shapes, you know what I'm talking about. A lot of people, when they're watching the X-Files, hides behind the defense that, well, the X-Files was made in the 90s by majority of white men, and so that excuses their problematic at best depiction of minorities, marginalized people, women, and North American indigenous peoples, as they do in the episode Shapes. That's bullshit. We should still judge the X-Files as harshly as we would a show made today. And I think it's kind of telling that in the X-Files revival, which came out, in 2016 through 2018, it was still doing this problematic shit. So that's extremely telling. Disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. This is kind of going to be anecdotal. I guess that's how you said that word. But it is relevant to what I'm about to talk about. So, a little background on me. I grew up in the Appalachian foothills, and Cherokee culture was a big fucking deal where I grew up. I myself am 4th generation Cherokee. My great-grandma's mom was a Cherokee woman. So, the place I grew up in, I was born in a town, Tuscumbia, that's named for a Cherokee chief. There's a town, Cherokee, very close to the place I grew up in. A lot of the people in my area where I grew up had their ancestors had migrated from North Carolina. And a lot of those people were survivors, excuse me, I cannot talk today, were survivors of the Trail of Tears, which was the exile of people from Cherokee lands to the west. And my ancestors, my Cherokee ancestors, fled from federal soldiers and hid in the Appalachian Mountains, and that's how they escaped the Trail of Tears. So Cherokee culture was a big deal when I grew up in the place I grew up in. I remember from the time I was in 1st grade that our school would bring Cherokee elders into the classroom. They would teach us about Cherokee language, Cherokee culture, Cherokee myths, traditional Cherokee lifestyle before the onset of European descended settlers, into traditional Cherokee lands. So I grew up in this very Cherokee culturally positive environment. So when the time I grew up in the late 80s and early 90s, when I would watch media, I would see problematic at best representation of North American indigenous peoples, and it pissed me off. Okay. um it pissed me off. um so uh when I encountered media that represented North American indigenous peoples in a positive light, which were very few and very far between. I'm thinking of the movie Dances with Wolves. Yes, it was problematic as fuck. Is Dances with Wolves problematic as fuck? Yes, it's problematic as fuck. It has the white savior complex. It's written and directed by a white man, Kevin Costner. You know, it's problematic. But it was one of the few pieces of media I saw that depicted North American indigenous peoples in a positive light, where they were neither a victim or a villain. You know, it showed indigenous peoples living their lives and celebrating their cultures and having their relationships and, you know, just being human beings, right? So Shapes, the X-Files episode Shapes, is another piece of media that did that for me. It represented North American indigenous peoples in a positive light. Did it fuck up that representation? Hell yeah. Because the X-Files has such a good track record for positively representing marginalized people. I'm just kidding. They don't. Okay? But I was like a goddamn vacuum cleaner sucking crumbs out of a rug. Like, and that's why the episode Shapes hit shit with me. It represented indigenous peoples in a positive light. It celebrated their culture. And it was a well-written episode. It's still problematic as fuck. You're going to have to excuse me. I'm sitting by the road.
Hello, can I smoke?
It is too damn hot to sit on my porch today. So I'm sitting out by the road, waving at cars like a silly person. So, let's talk about why Shapes is problematic to begin with. Its representation of North American indigenous culture, in hindsight, is not good. First of all, the X-Files, the show, just straight up invented a indigenous tribe, the Trejo, which is, it's fictional. Okay, first of all, why the fuck would you do that? All right. You know, there are several tribes inhabiting that area, you know, of Montana. Why couldn't they use one of those tribes? You know, why couldn't they represent one of those tribes? Also, it should have, if they were going to do this, it should have been written, directed, and handled by indigenous peoples, which of course it's not, because it's the goddamn X-Files. Okay, how many episodes were written by women? Out of the 278, I think. This episode is written by a woman, so I'll give them that. Marilyn Osborne. It's one of the few X-Files episodes written by a woman. Its representation of indigenous culture is also not good. The monster in this Monster of the Week episode is the Manitou, and they show the Manitou as this monster that will turn a man into an animal. And the Manitou isn't even that. Like, the Manitou is celebrated in indigenous cultures throughout the Western United States as a positive spirit. I kind of liken it to the Nez Perce tradition of the Waikan. It's a spirit that you can call upon. It could take the shape of an animal or even something inanimate, like a tree or a rock or a river. And it would kind of give you strength, you know, help you out. That's what the Manitou is. It's not a monster. Again, why couldn't they just use fucking skinwalkers? Skinwalkers are fucking there. All right, just I'm quoting the cast files. Love you, Kristen and Dave. Love your podcast. I got to catch up on it. They were talking about this episode, and they were like, "Why don't they just use skinwalkers?" I mean, mosquitoes are so bad today. Skinwalkers are just there, you know, as a negative creature in Western indigenous culture. Just use that. But of course they didn't. They used Manitou and fucked it up. So we've covered why this episode is problematic and why it should be judged as being problematic. However, when I was 11 years old, this episode hit shit with me. And I want to explain why, and I want to explain why I think these elements still hold up today. Because you know what? People can talk shit about this episode and still love goddamn postmodern Prometheus or small potatoes. And this episode is, excuse me for a moment. This episode is no more problematic than those. Okay? It doesn't have a goddamn rapist in it, all right? So, when I was 11 years old and I was watching the X-Files episode Shapes, there were several things I loved. And I kind of want to run down why. There's the guest stars. This episode has some of the best guest stars in season 1, and I'm just going to say in the whole series. There is Jimmy Herman. He plays Ish. He also played in Dances with Wolves, famously. There's Michael Horse. He is famous for being in the show Twin Peaks. If you're a fan of Twin Peaks, you'll know him. Renee, I think it's Morso. Please correct me if I'm mispronouncing that. She plays the character Gwen. She returns for another extra role in the X-Files episode Anasazi. These guest stars are acting their goddamn hearts out. And they're so fucking good. Michael Horse plays Sheriff Toscani. Jimmy Herman plays Ish. And Renee Morsu plays the character Gwen, who is the sister of the indigenous man who is murdered. So, the plot of Shapes, maybe we should talk about it. It's about these two ranchers, the Parkers, and they go out at night. They see something rustling around in their livestock yards. They think it's a beast. They shoot it, and it is a young indigenous Trejo man. Good and Snake. And his sister, Gwen, is pissed, understandably, about this. Another problematic element of this episode is it uses the person of color, indigenous person, being transformed into a non-human creature, which is fucking gross. But it's not as gross as some other representations of that, Brother Bear. I'm looking at you. So, guest stars, phenomenal. Showing the relationship of indigenous peoples and the United States government, the federal government, and how fraught that is something I think the X-Files could have done much more with. And the way they represented it in this episode is fucking good. So when I was a little girl, before I even went to school, I knew that Andrew Jackson was a bastard. Okay? And I think it's pretty safe to say that. That's not an opinion. That's a goddamn fact. Okay? He ordered the exile of indigenous men, women, and children, and the subsequent death of many of them in the Trail of Tears. Okay? He was a son of a bitch. When I was a little girl, I'd look at the $20 bill and I was like, what the hell? Why is this crusty white man here? Why isn't a Cherokee woman on our currency? Why is this genocidal maniac on our currency? Okay, I knew that from the beginning before I went to school. Okay, so that is represented well in this episode. Mulder and Scully kind of come to this reservation, and especially Mulder is throwing his weight around. And of course, Mulder believes that this is the work of shapeshifters, which in the episode is the Manitou. And I love the scene where Mulder and Scully come into the pool hall, and Mulder's shouting. He wants to know where things are, and Ish goddamn puts him in his place. Things that give me an orgasm when Mulder's selfishness is blown up in his goddamn face. I have an orgasm. It's so good. Mulder is a self-centered dick sometimes, and it's nice to see him put in his place. Ish is sitting in the back. He says, "I smell you, FBI," and it is good. He pretty much tells Mulder to go fuck himself. And this is not the last time Mulder will be told to go fuck himself in this episode. And then Gwen, who's also in the pool hall, she's bitter, angry about her brother's death, and she slams down her pool cue and she says, whenever you, meaning the federal government, needs something from us, indigenous peoples, but where are you when we need you? And again, that was a sentiment I grew up with, in the environment I grew up in. It was a prevalent perspective and an understandable one. So they go and see Charles Tuscany, who's played by Michael Horse. Michael Horse knocks it out of the goddamn park, as he always does. Hello. Waving at drivers like a silly person. It's an Alabama tradition. So, excuse me. Still dealing with this cold. So they go see Charlie Tuscany. They're looking at this body of Gooden Snake, and Mulder sees it has prominent incisors. Looks like it's been bitten. Again, Mulder and Scully are throwing their weight around here, thinking they have precedence here. And Tuscany, again, tells them, he's like, "I'm not a park ranger who is here to answer all of your questions, about indigenous peoples, And again, like, it's, he tells him, go fuck yourself, do the work. I'm not here to make allowances for you." And it's good. It's really, really good. So this leads to the third reason I loved this episode when I was 11, and that's goddamn werewolves. I mean, they're called Manitou in the episode, but they're goddamn werewolves. Okay, Mulder believes that Gooden Snake was turned into an animal by the spirit, a wolf-like animal, a shapeshifter. And Scully, of course, does not. So Scully is so good in this episode. And I know I say that in every episode, but she's fucking good in this episode. So we'll get to that in a second. Mulder believes it's a shapeshifter. They go to Gooden Snake's funeral pyre, where they meet Gwen and, again, Tuscany and Ish. And I love the scene where Mulder walks up to Tuscany and says, "Do you believe in shapeshifters?" And Tuscany just looks at him dead ass and says, "This is a funeral." One of the best exchanges in the X-Files. And we love some unintentional humor in the X-Files, and that's goddamn funny. Again, Tuscany's telling Mulder with his self-centeredness, just go fuck yourself, man. I don't have time for you, white boy. Go fuck yourself and your stupid tie, okay? Here's what he's telling Mulder. And then in contrast, Scully is very soft and gentle in this episode. She has a lot of really good moments, and good writing. You can kind of tell this is written by a woman. Like, Scully's just coming off of her father's death, and she's so gentle with Gwen. And I love the way Scully goes to Goodsnake's funeral, and she isn't going as an investigator. She's going as someone who has recently lost a loved one, and she's showing compassion to Gwen. And she tells Gwen, you know, I'm so sorry about your brother, and she's so gentle. And Gwen gives her her brother's, it's a kind of a trinket with these claws on it. And Scully is so happy about this. And Gwen is so embarrassed. She's like, it's no big deal. You know, I just have to get rid of this, you know. And Scully is just so cute. She's like, thank you. I'm like, yes, Scully, we know you have a type. The tall, dark type, brooding types, you know, Reyes and Mulder and Gwen. Yeah. Yes, Scully, we see that you have a type here. We understand. And then later on, Lyle, who's the son of the Parker family, you know, he's bitten by this Manitou creature. And he goes to the hospital, and again, Scully's so gentle. You know, she's trying to, he's come out of this trance, you know, and she's trying to tell him, your father is dead and you're probably responsible for his murder, you know, and she's trying to be so gentle with him. And it's a sweet moment. He's telling Scully about his mom and how she would, like, you know, rescue animals that were seen wandering around the ranch. And I get the feeling that she set them free instead of, you know, dispatching them. Can I just say, I kind of really like Lyle. I mean, I know he's a problematic character, but he seems really honorable. And, you know, like when he comes to Goodsnake's funeral, he wants to pay his respect. And then Gwen very understandably comes and tells him to go fuck himself and his stupid horse, right? So that's understandable, but I think Lyle's heart is in the right place. And then Scully, you know, is just reeling from her father's death, and she has to tell him, you know, your father's dead. And again, Scully, so gentle, so compassionate. It really highlights what a compassionate person she is. And it's in stark contrast to Mulder throwing his weight around in this episode. Again, Gillian's acting, give her all the Emmys. However, Mulder gets his good moment. They go to Ish's house, and Ish is telling them the legend of the Manitou and what he saw as a young man. This man, I think his name was Watkins, and he was turned into this beast when Ish was a young boy. And this episode's atmosphere is so good. It's one of the I am so sorry, I can't stop coughing. It's one of the best atmospheric episodes of the X-Files, and that's saying a lot. They go to Ish's house. They all sit down. Ish begins telling them this story an episode really takes the time to just suck you into this story of Ish like finding this half man, half wolf creature and the terror he felt. And it really reminds me of being little and listening to the scary stories my uncles and aunties and cousins would tell. And during the summer, and then knowing you'd have to walk home in the dark. It's that vibe. It really captures it. It's good. So they hear a scream outside. Gwen has seen the creature, and I really the curse can be, the Manitou curse can be passed down through bloodlines, which is a great twist on the werewolf story. I love to see werewolf stories with like an interesting spin on it. That's really cool. And I like to think Gwen is the carrier of the Manitou gene. Again, what a fantastic thing that would have been to bring back in later seasons, or even in the revival, like for Gwen to come back and they discover she's the carrier of this Manitou gene. The curse is still going on. Like, even at the end when Mulder and Scully are driving away, Ish is there and he's like, "I'll see you in 8 years, FBI." And like, it's set up that we'll get that sequel, kind of like we got with Faster or Modell, but of course we don't get it because we can't have nice things, with the X-Files. Anyway, Scully takes Lyle home from the hospital, and this is where the thing I love most about this episode, and that's the werewolf transformation. This was a time before the onset of CGI, so a lot of it was practical effects, and it's hokey and kind of campy, but it's well done for what they had. Like, the transformation is a very good homage to American Werewolf in London. One of my very favorite movies, with Lon Chaney, and yeah, like his fangs growing out, his limbs turning the wrong way. It looks goddamn painful. This episode does a fantastic job with the little practical effects that they had, and even like the monster in the person in the werewolf suit. Like, it's campy, but the atmosphere is so good. Like, you just go with it. It's kind of like the Fluke Man, or the vampires in Bad Blood. Like, it's campy, but we're all having such a good time, and the atmosphere is so good, and the acting is so spot on. We can just roll with it. And I think that's a lot of the fun of the X-Files. Like, this is fake, but you also know you're here to have a good time with some spooky paranormal shit. And, I think that's the essence of the X-Files. So, that's my rundown of the episode shapes. I think this is the longest video I've made. This is going to run up to 30 minutes. Problematic as fuck, but the parts that are good hold up. And I think when you're watching the X-Files, you have to acknowledge the problematic parts and acknowledge how bad they can be, but also understand that there are parts that are good and that hold up. And I think the episode Shapes does that, and it's a good example of that. And again, if people can love the postmodern Prometheus and fucking Small Potatoes, I can still love Shapes, okay, while understanding why it's problematic. So, what episode do you want me to analyze next? I'm curious. I want to know. Hit me up. I'm doing underrated X-Files episodes, but if there's one that's overrated that you believe you want me to talk about, tell me why it's overrated. Tell me why an episode's underrated. I want to hear from you. So hit me up. Let me know. And I I'm in love with the shape of you.
Mwah.